new video games, and he should be clickable in the description below. And what we're talking about is Avowed got delayed, and I wanted to give Kirk credit. We covered the delays last week of Stalker, questioning whether or not that fourth quarter for Xbox was going to get a little too full, and would stuff start to slip in to next year. And Kirk's like, delay Avowed. Its combat still looks a little bit rough. It needs work. Give it a little bit more time. And sure enough, in the week after he said that, Avowed has been delayed to February. But the reasoning that Xbox gave is not what you might expect. I want to get into that with Kirk about potential other delays, Game Pass effect, and the like. I'm going to end the previous stream about Xbox hardware and bring everybody over with Redirect. Kirk, thanks for being here, and let them know you kind of didn't want to do this show. You were wanting to do something else.
Yeah, I finally got the chance to play quite a bit of Marvel Rivals over the weekend, so I put that on the table if you wanted to do some coverage of that. A great game, looking to be a staunch competitor to Overwatch, especially with people kind of lower on that game right now. But yeah, I guess sometimes I got to be right. I throw so many wild takes out there that one of them's got to stick. So this one I did kind of nail. I think it was just kind of like a common sense thing of, you know, they announced that Stalker was delayed. They didn't delay it out of the year, so we had that discussion, and I said I do think one's got to go. One's got to get kicked out to 2025, and Avowed just seemed to make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times when people see a delay like this, your reasoning was combat still looks rough. Game could use some more polish, because, you know, I think the pieces and the parts of Avowed look quite good, but I tend to agree with a lot of the observations about the combat needs some polish, especially if you're going to be playing it in third person, since it doesn't really seem like they built it for that. But their reasoning seemed to be more in line with that it's kind of full at the fourth quarter. I argue that's not good for Game Pass, right? Game Pass likes to have things spread out to keep you on Game Pass. If you blow everything in 2 months, you know, that doesn't really work. And they basically said in their announcement this was to help people's backlogs breathe, which didn't get the greatest reception. I think people were like, what are you talking about? It's another year of inconsistent releases and delays. All you've done so far is like Hellblade 2. So what do you think about their reasoning? How did you read that? Because it did not seem to go over all that well.
I could see it not going over that well, but if you recall last week, like that's exactly what I said when we were getting some pushback from, I think, somebody in chat about how, like, they were basically accusing me of glorifying delays and saying that delays aren't good, like they're bad because you're not getting games that you were promised or what have you, especially on the Game Pass service that Xbox continuously touts that they've got these games coming down the line and they get pushed further and further back. We've seen that time and time again. But I did say, like, that's one of the benefit of delays is, like, or at least I don't see it as a drawback that something's coming later, because I can just play it then. And like there's so many games this year that I haven't had the opportunity to finish. Banishers is one, Rise of the Ronin is another, which you graciously got me, and the Focus Home gave me Banishers to review. So like both of those were review games that I jumped in, played as much as I possibly could before the review, and then it's like after that, I wanted to finish it, but it's like gotta move on to the next thing now. And so like that's, as somebody that like does like content and stuff, I can't imagine like if you got, you know, a full-time job and the kids and, you know, might have a side hobby or something that isn't content creation or doesn't have anything to do with games, you probably got some games on your plate that you can still play. I mean, I haven't played either the Final Fantasy VII remake or Rebirth yet. I think what they were talking about is like quite literally people's backlogs. But because everybody's thinking in this like console war type of like space, like mentality wise, they're thinking, well, we don't have much of a backlog of Xbox games. You know, you haven't been putting out exactly like a bunch of bangers or anything. Like, what are you talking about? I think Xbox quite literally and innocuously meant like your backlog, like as in like maybe you wanted to put another 50 hours into Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring. Like I don't think they had any sort of implication about it being like your Xbox backlog or like your Game Pass backlog.
Right.
Like people are gonna perceive it in that way because everything gets perceived in that way of like Xbox versus PlayStation. I mean, they could have been talking about Astrobot for all we. I mean, you know, like I think it was a very innocuous, you know, well-meaning enough statement about just like, hey, you probably are gonna have a plenty of games to play. what I guess the quiet part that they don't want to say is we don't want this to be competing for your time. We don't want Avowed to come out at a time where you're not going to have the time to play it. You're not going to jump in. You're not going to drop money if you're not on Game Pass to buy it. We'd rather it come out in February. We'll take our chances that you're going to have the time to jump into it. Then we think around the holiday season, things are a little bit too crowded. So we're going to move it out. But they kind of spun it as like, oh, it's a benefit to like gamers rather than, you know, them just saying, well, we want to avoid a Titanfall 2 situation. We don't want to get eclipsed by other stuff. That sounds weak. That doesn't sound like you're choosing or strategizing from a position of strength. So I think they spun it in such a way to be like, oh, we're doing it for the gamers, like for your backlog or whatever. And of course, people are just going to dissect that to the 9,000th degree of like, what do you mean? The Xbox doesn't have a backlog. And just, you know.
Which I think is fair. I think that's been one of the frustrations with Xbox this gen. It's been marked by delays. It's been marked by games that come out and are not ready. You know, Redfall, you know, and Forza Motorsport. Halo Infinite launched its multiplayer in a beta. Like they're seemingly having trouble getting their games to market in a timely fashion. And then when they do come out, they have issues. I mean, Starfield, you could talk about the subjectivity there of Starfield of like, is it a good game or not? But clearly even that game has gone through significant quality of life changes since it launched. Makes it seem as though its launch date was also not exactly a timely launch date. So it really makes me wonder when I look at that calendar, because now we are once again, like, it's like the meme is alive and well. We're back to that wait until. It's like, well, 2025 is going to be a banger. I saw so many people saying that. I'm like, that's what you said about this year, and that's what we said about last year. And it's like, and then there was the year where they did the showcase, and like, yeah, here's all the games coming out over the next 12 months, and most of them didn't make it. And it's like, listen, if you guys would stop speaking out of turn and stop pushing release dates or release windows, just slow down. Because going forward, I think they have no excuse. Like, that's why I'm like, I'm not confident in any release dates that I see now. Like, case in point, right? We've talked quite a bit about Fable, and, you know, if that game is anywhere near to, you know, to coming out, it's coming out next year, and we've seen far less gameplay of Fable than that entire gameplay simulated sequence we saw for Perfect Dark. It's like, okay, well, is that because the game isn't ready as well? Is that because this game's launch date is, you know, equally questionable? Because going forward now, it's like, okay, well, if Game Pass is what matters and hitting that cadence is what matters, if games have to start getting delayed and they start stepping on each other's toes, you're going to start kicking them down further down the road, not because it's good for the consumer or good for the game. You're going to do it because it's good for Game Pass, which I think is that's a valid question to ask. Like, you guys didn't move. It doesn't seem to me like they moved Avowed because it needed more time. There's no good answer here. They either moved Avowed because it needs more time, which is now evidence of another developer that can't bring a product to market on time, or it's, no, we're doing this for Game Pass, which means, well, release dates are now subject to, if you guys can't, your game can't get out on time, you're going to push other things further down the road because we got to keep the Game Pass cadence spread out.
See, either of those is an inherent negative, though. I mean, so you're saying on the one hand, Xbox is willing, unlike the Redfall situation, and unlike CD Projekt with Cyberpunk, they're willing to give their developers the time they need before they release a game, and they will delay the game even, you know, to their own detriment, to the own hit to their brand and their image as far as getting these games out at the cadence that they promise. Or when they say, oh, all the games you saw here today are going to come out within 12 months, they'll take the hit and give the devs more time if the game's not ready, so the consumer can have a more complete product, a more better performing, better functioning product by the time they get it in their hands, so that they get the value for their money. I see that as a benefit, even though we have to wait longer for the game. And then if you're talking about, well, they're going to spread things out as far as, you know, the things on the subscription, I see that as a benefit too, because I have a limited amount of time. So, I mean, I don't want House of the Dragon and, you know, Succession's over now, but Succession and another show from HBO to all come out at the same time, because I want to devote my time to watching a particular thing. And it's the same thing with games. Like, I want to spend, you know, 30 or 40 hours in a particular game and then not have, you know, the winds of whatever's coming next down the line make sure that a certain game passes me by and I don't get the chance to experience something like Avowed. Not that I'm super invested in experiencing Avowed in the first place, and I've been on record saying that I don't really think it's a banger by any means. But I think that in general, the two things that you just highlighted, like they certainly are ripe for criticism, but I don't think that there's anything inherently negative about the fact that they're willing to delay games either for the fact that it needs to be more polished, which I think that's a good thing, to be totally honest. I get what you're saying about that it doesn't bode well, like if like all of Xbox's in-house studios can't meet deadlines, but also like it is what it is. Like, I don't know, if games take longer to come out, all that means is that it demands patience from us. Like, I don't think playing a game in 2025 is any different than me playing a game in 2026. I don't really understand the mentality of people getting very, very upset about that. There's always going to be games to play, especially in the current climate with all the indies and all the resources available to like smaller studios and outlets and stuff. And then just spreading out things for the subscription, I guess there is a negative there, because if you're paying month to month or something like that, like I'm loaded up for like another year or whatever because I got in at a lower price point. I can understand if you're paying month to month, like you wouldn't want to then have to wait 3 more months and then be on the sub, or decide, am I going to cancel the sub and then get back on the sub 3 months from now? I can see that being irksome. So maybe that's the bigger negative out of the two. But I definitely can respect Xbox wanting to give their own properties some room to breathe, even if maybe that does have some detrimental side effects.
I remember earlier this year saying that, I wasn't sure about these games having, releasing this year when they wouldn't give us release dates at the developer direct. And then I said it again during the Xbox showcase. I was like, why would you not have release dates for these games? And somebody made the point of, they like that idea of, these games are coming this year so that you keep your Game Pass subscription, like if you have a locked in hard date. And I thought that observation was fair. But I also remember when we had Doc Dark on the podcast a long time ago, and I remember him saying, he asked chat if they were confident that Spider-Man was going to be at 60 FPS. And then he asked the same question about a couple of Xbox titles, and people were not confident that they were going to be 60 FPS. And he said that's the problem, that you can't even be confident about performance. Well, I think another problem's emerging here. Why would I, as a consumer right now, have confidence in any release dates or any release windows that Xbox puts out there? Because now it seems as though you just say it to say it. You're not saying it because it's genuine. It's just a bunch of pomp and circumstance. Like, we're in another year now where we go from hailing Xbox as having the best showcase of Summer Game Fest to turning around and saying, well, another delay from Stalker, and now another delay for Avowed, and now all that promises of a full year with a steady cadence of games. It's Hellblade 2, and now you're waiting. Like, I think it's fair to say going forward, they either need to shrink the marketing windows or stop saying dates, or at the very least, what I think is the best scenario to do in general is use the showcase to just go games crazy, tons of gameplay, and then use the developer direct in January to say, these are the games coming, these are the dates, because at that point, your date should be locked in. If you're within 10 months of a game coming out, I think it's inexcusable. If your game's coming out within 10 months, you should be able to give me a release date. I don't see other developers dealing with this. Release dates commonly get moved when they're announced way far in advance, not when they're announced in the year the game is supposed to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's valid criticism to say that their marketing strategy, it doesn't coincide well with not having concrete release windows, or the ones that can fluctuate or just are open to change or open to getting pushed back. I think the best example of that I already alluded to, which was the all the games that you saw today will come out sometime in the next 12 months, and like it was like 2 of them or something. Like, it was ridiculous. And so they've left themselves room to pivot since then. But then, as we both remarked before, why even box yourself into that? Like, even though you're leaving yourself room to pivot, why even announce that Avowed is coming in 2025? You don't have to. Nobody's holding a gun against your head or anything. As far as like you having to provide that announcement, and then they delayed it. What has it even been 2 months since they showed that off at SGF? I don't think so. If so, it's like budging right up against that. So like, about 2 months ago, they said it was going to be this year. Now they're saying it's 2025. That just shows how unnecessary it was for them to say it was going to be this year. So I think that I can't really defend them in that regard, and I don't really feel inclined to. I think your criticisms are fairly valid as far as like, if they know that their release windows are so in flux and so subject to change, then they probably need a marketing strategy that corresponds with that and can account for that and can reassure and bring confidence in spite of that. Like, I think that's the main issue here. Like, I don't particularly have a problem with games just coming when they end up coming. Like, I don't have a problem with them releasing when they're ready and not before. And so, like, if you tell me that's when it's going to release is when it's ready, that's totally okay. But I think the fact that, like, they're coming off a little bit disingenuous or like untrustworthy at this point, or the alternative is that they like don't know what they're doing and they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out, oh, well, Stalker's got to get delayed, so what do? I guess we'll move Avowed now. Like, you know, there's like a level of disorganization or chaos going on, or lack of competency. So it's either that, or like they don't really care about when they put something out there communication wise to the public or to their base. Well, that's just subject to change 2 months later. They don't care about that. It's one or the other, and neither of them is a good look for them. So I do think they need to sort of tighten that up in some way. I think they need to have a strategy that corresponds with, you know, if that's just the reality of games these days, at least, you know, over at Xbox, that they need the kind of broader range of like when these things are going to come out and when they're going to be ready in a post-COVID world, or in, you know, just the gaming development climate that we're in now with the tech that they're using and the engines that they're using. That's totally fine. I think they just need to either be direct and like transparent with their base and with the community and the consumers that are going to buy it, or they need to find a marketing spin that works for it, that takes it into account, that's kind of like a clever spin on it, that doesn't just kind of say one thing and then they go and do something else that contradicts that. They need to find a plan of action there, I think.
Well, and people in chat are chiming in, and Elsewhere Broadcast has said it, many people have said it, that this is in relation to Stalker 2 getting delayed. Like, this is not, you know, this has anything to do with, you know, Avowed. But, you know, your take was delay Avowed, it looks the most rough out of the bunch. Does this cast any doubt on Indiana Jones? Because I've continued to say I felt like Indiana Jones' release date was slippery. I was like, I don't know. That felt like it came out of nowhere. It's not going to be playable at Gamescom, which is cause for concern for some people. Now, I could see that one of two ways. It's like, hey, they want them digging down and working on the game and not working on a vertical slice. But it's like, somebody brought up a good point. Wouldn't they at least have a preview version ready? When are they going to let people play this for previews and reviews? Like, if they don't have that ready for Gamescom, then that means they're really up against the time crunch. Because we know Space Marine 2 canceled their beta because they want to make sure the game ships. Like, they're digging down and focusing on optimization as well. So that could be a similar situation with Indiana Jones. It's like, well, we don't want to have a demo or a slice available for Gamescom. But that also is, like, if we walk away from Gamescom and don't have a release date for Indy, that again feels like a game that like came out of nowhere. They just want to tout the property, and it's, to me, the worry is it either gets delayed or it's going to ship and just obviously be another game that's not ready for the market.
I mean, maybe. I think you're doing a little bit of Chicken Little action here on Indiana Jones, and we'll certainly pivot right back and give you your flowers if you end up being right. I'm very sure of that, but I do not think the sky is falling. I even if they don't have a build ready for Gamescom, I mean, this is a game we don't know when it's coming out. It could come out literally 4 months from the date of Gamescom, and 4 months is quite a bit of time for them to make a lot of improvements. And we talked a couple of times now on these shows about how I wonder why that footage didn't look good that they showed at this event. What, you know, was it from a build from 2 months ago? Have they made a lot of progress since then? Seeing different showcases and different footage that kind of contrast with each other. One looks bad, one looks good. When was that from? Is that from an earlier build? You know, we've talked about that, and maybe them showing something that wasn't ready for prime time at one of these showcases. So perhaps they're rather astutely and prudently trying to avoid that with Gamescom. We don't know. in my opinion, and this is kind of why I was able to get this right in the first place, I think all these things kind of inform each other or like read off of each other. And so the very first thing that we addressed was like the Stalker 2 delay last week. And I said to you, to me, that November 20th date is like, that's set in stone. Like for them to push the button to say that's the date that we're going to, we are delaying it. Like that says to me they're not delaying it after that. Like come hell or high water, that game is coming out on November 20th. That they've sort of committed to. And so that is kind of how you can shape the rest of the things and like predict different things. So that was what initially led me to feel like Avowed was the one that was going to get delayed, because Avowed was going to come out about 10 days prior to that in November. I just thought it was common sense that didn't work. So Avowed, I thought worked a lot better in February or March. Turns out it's coming out in late February. So like I was able to kind of perceive from the Stalker 2 delay, that where Avowed might land. And so now from the Avowed delay, I think we can kind of perceive what's going on with Indiana Jones, which is that if Indiana Jones wasn't ready for prime time and wasn't ready to come out this year, I think Indiana Jones would have been the one to get the boot, and then Avowed would have just been announced for December. So like I think the fact that they chose Avowed to move out of this year tells us that Stalker 2 is coming out this year and the Indiana Jones is coming out this year. So I don't really have any issues or any need to like, I don't want to say fear monger, but again, like kind of any alarm bells or saying that the sky is falling or anything with Indiana Jones. Now, if something comes out, report wise, or, if they're experiencing some trouble or something and that gets reported on and we start hearing rumblings of that, maybe that's a different story. But so far, like what they've shown is a competent game that, looks somewhere from very good to very average. We're not really sure right now, but it certainly doesn't look bad by any means. I know some people in chat are saying it does, but it doesn't. It looks fine. And in the first showing, it looked great, even in my opinion. But like, I think that game will be ready to go. I also don't think again, it's all part of that console war mentality and like, oh, Xbox is this, Xbox is that. But like, to group machine games in with like other Xbox studios, I don't think is appropriate. Like they have a long history and track record of making quality games. They made the Wolfenstein series most recently, and they're most known for that. Those games, they're fairly good, other than Youngblood being a weird departure that went into some co-op territory that nobody asked for. I think that this game is fine. It's in very capable hands. I wouldn't be ringing any type of alarm bells unless we see something that sort of warrants that. So I would expect Machine Games to be able to deliver sometime this year, unless, all these delays are emblematic of a deeper problem of maybe Xbox setting deadlines and release dates that are earlier than the devs would like. And so they have a pattern of doing that. And then the devs are like, we literally cannot meet this date. You've got to push it back. I mean, that's a completely hypothetical situation. We have no evidence of that, but like that's the only thing that I could think of that could be like an actual systematic problem across all these studios. Otherwise, the fact that they're linked by all being under the Xbox umbrella, I don't think that's something that can affect all these studios like corporate wide. Like you've still got the culture that you have at Machine Games versus the culture you have at Obsidian. Those are not at all equatable by any means. Not to say the Obsidian is like worse or anything. I'm just saying like they're going to be different. Like they're not one and the same, and they're not acting in unison. So I don't think that there's like an inexorable link there just because they're all under the Xbox umbrella. I think the Indie's one thing, and Avowed is another thing, and Stalker is another thing, and then Fable is another thing. And so all those games are kind of going on their own journey and their own cycle. And some of them have been problematic, and some of them I would assume are not problematic. And I think Indie is one of the latter.
Well, here's what I'm going to say as a pushback, okay? I'm just going to list some developers and just say I've heard these same arguments so many times. We heard very similar arguments about Arcane Austin. We heard similar arguments about Bethesda and Turn 10 with Forza Motorsport. And now we're hearing the same thing about Obsidian with Avowed, and we're hearing the same thing about Machine Games with Indie. And it's like, these are an awful lot of studios that everybody had tons of confidence in, and now all that confidence is getting real shaky. Arcane Austin is gone. And the one studio that cranked out a banger for him, Tango, gone. And now we've got, Machine Games, we've got Obsidian, And we've got the team at Fable or Turn 10 with Forza Motorsport seemingly pushing their games out either later than planned or when they're not ready. Like Forza Motorsport has gotten a ton of updates and changes because it clearly launched in a state that was not ready for prime time. Same with Starfield. Like Bethesda has done great work, fixing and making that game better. So when you say that, my instinct is to be like, man, I feel like I've been here before. I feel like I've been looking at gameplay and been like, this looks rough, this looks bad, and I'm told this developer doesn't miss, this game's going to be just fine. And I'm like, I really hope you're right, because if you're not, we're going to have a clear pattern of developers that are falling from grace, and we're going to have to figure out what the cause is. Is this, like what's happened with 343 and Halo? Everybody wants to blame 343, but I'm like, 343... the autopsy that Jason Schreier did pointed to more of a Microsoft corporate policy issue than anything. It's like, are all these developers facing similar problems and struggles, or is there something else going on? Like we've talked about the Series S as well, and it could be a contributing factor.
I'm trying to argue that to say it's an Xbox problem is a false correlation. I'm not really saying that Machine Games doesn't miss. I brought up a time that they missed very recently with Youngblood. That was absolutely a miss. I think in general their body of work is quite favorable to look back upon. But like examples of why saying that it's an Xbox problem would be like a false correlation. I mean, Bungie just in the news for having terrible mismanagement. They're obviously as of late under the Sony umbrella. So like that's a counterexample. You just mentioned Space Marine 2 earlier. That's not necessarily going according to plan as far as when the release of that is supposed to be in the open beta for that. That's Saber Interactive. They're on their own, or I can't remember who their usual publisher is. Rocksteady with Suicide Squad, BioWare with Anthem, and they're on shaky ground going into Dragon Age. Veilguard. I was gonna say Dreadwolf. Dragon Age Veilguard. They're on some shaky ground going into that. Like they kind of need to prove themselves again. So like I think this is kind of like an industry-wide problem. I don't know if it's like the tech that we're dealing with. Like you brought up Unreal 5 a couple of times and the sort of documented challenges of working with that. I don't know if it's just that we just moved to a certain generation or level of resources and abilities for gaming and for visuals that makes performance difficult to optimize, or it just makes it difficult to get games out the door because there's so many components that you have to kind of put together. I'm not really sure, but it does seem to be like an industry-wide problem that games, they're harder to get out, that it's harder to meet these initial deadlines and release dates, and it seems like people need more time. It seems like more games are releasing that could use more time. Like we see time after time, these games will come out, and then a year later, it's a completely different game, and it's much better experience for the player and for the consumer. So, I mean, I think that's just something that we just have to accept as a reality, and like it. Once we do that, I think the only conclusion that you can draw is just like, okay, well, then that means that we might get a game like Cyberpunk or whatever in the future that will not come out until way later down the line than we expected. And then hopefully we don't have that whole fiasco again. And then we don't even know. Like, that's the thing, is like the ones that come out and they're good, or they're at least like competent enough, it might be like more of a like average experience. It might be, high 70s, low 80s or whatever. But just the fact that it got out the door and it wasn't a complete buggy mess, like we'll never know. We'll never know if it had been released a year earlier, how bad it could have been. I think that's like just more of a reality now, is that like all of these games, they're taking more time. They're larger endeavors. That's why the indie space is crushing it so much right now, is because like they have a shorter cycle for these games. Sometimes they're using less assets, less resources to make a game that's like on par with something that could have come out 5-6 years ago. So it's like pretty much an accomplishment by every right. It's a fantastic game to play, and then it's like on a much smaller scale. That's why indie is like thriving so much. Whereas these big blockbuster like AAA projects, like they're kind of tough at this point, like for anybody to do something with. So I think that, again, I don't think it's a symptom of like one particular corporation or anything like that. Like I think we see this across the board with very few exceptions. I mean, who knows when GTA 6 is going to come out? I'm sure Rockstar's having their own share of difficulties as far as like making sure that that's all together the way it should be and everything's polished we may not see that game for another 2 years or more even. Who knows? So like I think that's like going to be a problem across the board, and we just kind of have to acclimate to that new reality, I think.
Yeah, I think chat's pushing back on what you're saying, and I was going to do the same thing.
Well, they did that last week, Lona.
And that's fine. I think that makes for a good show. I don't think you've done a good job demonstrating that this is an industry problem, because like Bungie, I don't think is a good example, because they came out and owned it. The CEO basically said, we got too ambitious. I incubated teams, spread our talent too thin, and we were operating in the red. So that's a specific reason that happened, that we've been given by the CEO, of just basically mismanaging talent, mismanaging expenses. They basically thought, Destiny was going to continue to be their cash cow and fund their projects and their growth. And I don't think that's comparable to what we've seen from the Xbox studios. And then Space Marine, optimization issues isn't really I will agree, generally there is an industry-wide problem with optimization. Games continue to come out and they seem to be a little rough, their performance is not great or not consistent. That I will always agree with. I think that's a very, very broad brush to include Xbox in. I don't think that's what happened with Redfall. It wasn't like, oh, it's poorly optimized. No, it was crap. It wasn't ready. It was half-baked. It wasn't complete. Forza Motorsport didn't launch and have some optimization issues. It wasn't ready. It had pieces missing, right? You could maybe argue that a lot of the issues with Starfield were optimization, but they're putting a ton of quality of life into the game. Entire feature sets have been added to Starfield. That's not optimization. That's not like, oh, our frame rate or we need a performance mode patch. So I think, yes, there's a general struggle right now, especially with Unreal 5 games, to launch and to have them be well optimized. I don't see that happening with Xbox games. It's not like, oh, well, we'll just get a little patch, maybe performance will get a little bit better. It's like, no, your games aren't ready, so you delay them, and when they do launch, they're still not ready. They still need work, and I don't think that falls under the umbrella of optimization struggles.
But so, like, what do you think it is then, other than this like ethereal stench that Xbox just infects all of their studios with, so that like the end product is half-baked and sucky? I mean, like, I can't think of anything like tangible or real that isn't just like a figment or perceived that could actually be going on here that would make all these studios that like have previously been successful, like Outer Worlds, fine game, competent game, like better than average, like quite a good game that I think it got nominated at the Game Awards. Same studios, going to be coming out with Avowed. What is it about Xbox being involved that would now make their next project be like, excuse my language, but shittier than the last one? I mean, I don't think that's a real thing. Like, I think that's like console war type thinking. Like, that's internet troll type of spin. I don't think that actually is something that can happen.
You don't think there's also a pattern of third-party games having to come to Xbox late, and they've all but indicated and said out loud that it's a Series S? I mean, we now have a pattern of games either skipping Xbox or coming to Xbox late, and the Series S seems to be the problem. Inatria was going to come late. Baldur's Gate 3 came late. Black Myth Wukong's coming late. Like, there's a pattern of game devs saying, yeah, our Xbox version's not going to be ready. So it's like, that to me, where there's smoke, where there's fire. I mean, if third-party devs are having an issue, I don't think first-party devs are immune to those struggles. I really don't.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, we've seen quite a few cross-platform games, I think, that have come out and don't have any issues on Xbox. But there's something to what you're saying. I mean, there's a lot of devs that are saying that there are difficulties present on that one platform that aren't present on the other platforms. So it could have something to do with that. If you've got an in-house structure that is primarily developing for that ecosystem and for that platform, maybe it kind of skews what your end goal is and what your end outcome looks like to a certain extent. I don't know why that would necessarily lead to like a systematic unraveling of like all these different studios. I mean, like, look at Nintendo. They design for lower performing hardware all the time, and they put out absolute bangers a lot of the time. I mean, they just know how to optimize for whatever their hardware is in a given generation. So it could be just that the developers aren't accustomed to having to do that because they're used to being on the latest and greatest platform. I don't know. I'll be interested to see what happens with indie. I think machine games is more than capable. Again, I don't want to sit here and tout, oh, they never miss and they'll be just fine and whatever. Like, I think that'll be a great proof of concept. Like, if they can come out with a game that performs more than adequately and, you know, it's in the mid 80s or whatever, then I think we'll know that, like, this isn't just a pervasive Xbox issue and nobody can possibly overcome it. Xbox is just, like, proverbially doomed, I guess, for anybody that has to release on that platform and account for the Series S. I don't personally believe that. I think that hopefully indie is a showcase that that's not the case, but I don't think that that's the case. I think that, you know, we see games, at least older games like Cyberpunk and other stuff now, that perform just fine on Xbox. Like, if anything, like, Series X is in still some cases like the best platform for, like, Tekken 8. I was trying to think of an example. Tekken 8 came out earlier this year. It looks a lot better on Xbox. I reviewed that game on both platforms. It visually is more striking on Xbox. So, like, Xbox still has its advantages. Now, that's the Series X, mind you. So I'm not trying to argue against the fact that Series S exists and they're still shooting for parity there, and that maybe is folly. But as far as, like, Xbox in general, the entirety of the platform, like, I don't think it's inherently flawed to the extent that it would just completely undermine all of these devs and their efforts, to the extent that they would just not be able to get anything off the ground. At least that's my hope anyway. And I haven't seen any definitive evidence of that as of yet.
Well, I hope you're right, because I just see everything pointing to the Series S, and the concern that I have is, just this morning, I argued that if you follow the money and you listen to Satya Nadella and you listen to Amy Hood, Microsoft's CFO, they view the plan for growing the gaming business as viewing it as a software annuity and subscription business. So it's like they're wanting to put these games everywhere. They're wanting to publish games. That's how they're going to make their money. And you have to ask the question, like, if you're making games that need to sell well on PlayStation as well as PC, and you're having to wrangle with the Series S, and if I'm correct, and it is posing some kind of a problem, I really wonder what the strategy is going forward. Like, is Satya and the CFO, are they going to be like, listen, if that's a barrier for our games coming to market, then you got to figure out a way around that. Either drop parity, or
they'd have to sunset it, right? Like, I think they would just have to, like, do, like, a half-gen step up where they're like, yeah, games don't come to Series S anymore, or something. Like, I don't think there's any alternative. If it, let's say, like, the hypothetical of that, it's, like, undermining every single in-house, or not in-house, you know what I mean, Xbox Studios umbrella, Xbox exclusive, and even non-exclusive project out there that has to come to the Xbox platform. It quite literally is undermining every single one, because they have to develop it for the Series S. If that is the case, then I think they don't have an alternative. They would have to sunset that specific iteration of the console and just say, like, here's the cutoff, and then the box isn't going to say XS anymore. It's just going to say X on it, and they'll just eat the crow that they have to for that and move on, because the alternative is much worse, I think, in terms of the damage to their brand.
Well, yeah, because think of a game like Blade, okay? Blade right now has been announced, and it's going to come out likely in, what, we're thinking 4 years, maybe? So by the time that comes out, expectations of what it should look like, run like, you know, graphics-wise, PS5 Pro is going to enter the picture and start to, again, set those expectations of the line being pushed. People are going to want, that's what people expect from tech. They expect it to get better. The PC line gets pushed every year, right? We get new graphics cards, we get new chipsets, we get new things that push that line. And the concern that then I would have is, you have developers that are trying to build a game that won't be hitting the market for 4 or 5 years. And they're like, well, we have to make sure that it can run on what essentially at that point is going to feel like an old gen box. And people, they always take this personal when this comes up, because it's like they bought the Series S. They think I'm slamming them. It's like, I'm not slamming you. This particular device seems to be a perpetual problem. Like, it's not going to go away. If games that look like what I'm looking like when I look at Indiana Jones and I look at Avowed, I don't see anything mind-blowing. They are good-looking games, okay? That's it. They're good-looking games.
Yeah.
And you have to think, if that's going to be sort of the ceiling of what we get from these studios, that's going to pose a problem to everything Satya and the CFO have been signaling. If you want to enter the buy-to-play market and you want to have a strong showing, You're going to have to be able to push the graphical envelope. If not, like you said with Nintendo, you're going to have to lean into what Nintendo leans in, which they've cornered that market on the family gaming, party gaming. Like, they can make a Mario or a Zelda game and nobody cares that it runs poorly or, looks old. They don't care. That's a different audience. It's a different demographic entirely. The expectations, I think, are different there. So that is I think, to me, the most interesting development going forward, with Satya signaling that 500 MAUs and we're making more on content and services. And it's like, how long are you going to put up with what I feel is an anchor on all the developing work that you guys have been trying to put out? And people don't have to agree with me, but I continue to think that the Series S is just the self-made Trojan horse. Like, they've got, as you're saying, like, at some point you have to sunset it, kick it to the curb. I saw Xbox podcasters saying this like last year. You just have to drop support for the S. And it's like, what are you talking about? It's like, we're 3 years in. How do they do that and not just absolutely break so much consumer trust?
Well, before this past week, when we had the reports come out about how down their hardware sales are, and people like Paris Lilly and Destin Legary saying, maybe they need to drop hardware altogether. Like, things are that bad. Before that, weren't there reports coming out that Xbox was interested in starting another gen, like not even a half gen, like they were going to brand it as like next gen as soon as 2026, if not 2026, 2027. But I think 2026 was like the soonest that they were thinking about doing that. And that would be like a pretty quick turnaround for a generation. Is that possibly why? Like, did they just want to cut the cord and just move on and kind of have a hard reset with like a new gen and kind of do that early? Maybe try to get out ahead, replicate what they did with the 360, where they got out ahead of the PS3 and had enjoyed some success there before the PS3 actually launched in that like 2006 to 2008 window when the Xbox 360 was king. Maybe they want to try to replicate that and sort of ditch the anchor that you're talking about, like actually get out to sea again. That could be why, because I thought those reports were kind of odd as far as like, why would you be trying to go to another generation already that you're not doing particularly well in this one? Why are you looking to turn the page that quickly? And I guess that's wise, because like there's not any success on the horizon or potential for them with this particular generation. Maybe that's why they want to go ahead and start the next cycle early.
Well, I've heard that. Jez Corden stopped by the show earlier, and we appreciate him doing that. And he said that that hardware has been greenlit. There is more hardware coming. Mm-hmm. He has pointed to handheld. He has pointed to like sideload, Steam, PC hybrid. He's not the only one, right? I'm not putting this all on him, but a lot of people have said, that's what they view as coming.
Yeah,
I could take what they're saying and put together my own theory that they could turn the Series S basically into a cloud machine, and games could start hitting it and only be available on cloud. But there's a significant problem there too. When you play a game on xCloud, you're playing it and it's a Series S profile, which means you're still facing the same optimization struggle of any game coming to market has to essentially be able to run on that limited power. You've got to be able to run on a Series X server blade that's been set up with numerous, I've been told somewhere between 2 to 4 Series S profiles on it. That's always been sort of my thought is the only way you can do right by the Series S owners is you basically give them some type of cloud access. But we don't even know if that would be a solution, because if your neighborhood internet is no good, you're not going to be able to play. Let's say Blade, right? You're not gonna be able to play Blade on the cloud and have a good time if your neighborhood internet's no good or oversold or outdated, which many people, especially in the West, are gonna deal with. So I don't know what the solution would be. Like, if you're saying if these leaks and indications and insiders are correct, and like 2026 sees new hardware from Xbox, and they, like you're saying, they want to jumpstart the next gen, if they do that, it needs to be something that is unified, right? Don't do another 2-tier system. Like we don't need
I'm sure
that again.
That's the plan. Yeah. Unless it's a handheld, and that could be just completely different, or I don't know. But
how would a handheld even solve these problems? Like, that's not going to solve the problem. That if we're right, if the Series S is a problem, if that's why we're continuing to see games that just, like, why wouldn't you just come out and say, in the wake of the Avowed delayed, that's a bummer, and they put out their roadmap. That's a great time to put Indiana Jones's release date on the roadmap. Like, that's a really good time to basically, like, all right, let's win back a little bit of the confidence here.
This week. Could be sometime this week. I mean, we don't know. It's early. It's only 1 p.m. on Monday, but I mean, you're not wrong.
I mean, I tweeted a roadmap. That's a great time to be like, hey, you know, we're also gonna let you know here's when Indiana Jones is coming out. We really want our fourth quarter to land strong for you. And it's like, it just says TBA, which I think everybody's expecting it to be announced at Gamescom, because Xbox seems to be pushing for a strong presence at Gamescom.
That's another thing, guys, is like, there's been some people in here that are pretty critical of like these delays in general. I'm somebody who's very anti-crunch, and over the last couple of years, the industry has kind of had a focus on trying to not make employees crunch as much. And like, I'm totally in support of that. I believe in fair labor, and I believe in people having a decent enough work-life balance where they're not expected to come in for 80 to 100 and something hours in a given week just because they have a product deadline. Like, that is very, very rigorous when these game devs have to come in and crunch for a particular release date or a deadline, for the game to ship by the release date. And that had gotten really, really, really bad, like about four or 5 years ago. And some attention's been brought to it by the journalism industry in the gaming space, and there's been some focus put on it, I think, by the devs and by the larger corporations to mitigate it. Like, it's not gone away by any means. Like, and there is a level of crunch that kind of has to happen. Like, just when you come up against the deadline, like, all right, it's all hands on deck. But it was getting to an egregious point where it was like, this is the deadline, and we're gonna do whatever it takes with their employees, and like, they are trying to get away from that to some extent, and like, I'm in support of that. So if that means that I get the game in February the next year, I'm totally for that. I have argued for that. I have fought for that and would fight for that. I want devs to have a reasonable work balance and work schedule, and they're being expected to work 100 hours in a given week, 2-3 weeks in a row to get these games to ship. Like, it's just not necessary. It's not necessarily for me to have the game in hand by a particular time. So that is I don't know why Devil Shooter is saying in chat it's not a delay for crunch, though. I mean, we're not talking about specifically Avowed. Like, we're talking about these games across the board. And so, like, let's say that Indiana Jones has to get delayed. If it has to get delayed, they would have had to have crunched to have met whatever the release date is for this year. So, like, if they're delaying it, that means that they're choosing not to crunch their employees, not to have them work 110-hour work weeks to get it out the door this year, it's going to be a much worse look for Xbox if it doesn't come out this year, but then they're not doing that to their employees. I'm not misdiagnosing what's happening here, Eugene. I'm simply accounting for it as an aspect of delays. It's inarguable that an aspect of delay is that it mitigates or it prevents an element of crunch. If you do not delay a game and it is not quite ready to come out by the time that it was planned to release, you would have to overwork your employees to hit that deadline for it to be as ready as it possibly can be by the time it needs to ship. So if a delay happens, that means some crunch was mitigated. Like, that's just a fact. So, like, that's an element of these delays that we haven't really talked about up to this point. And that's mostly because crunch hasn't been as much of a problem in the last couple of years. It was a really big problem about 4 years ago. So I'm totally in support of that continuing to be mitigated and alleviated by these type of practices. Again, it's not the reason. It's not like, oh, we delayed Avowed so that our employees wouldn't have to crunch. Like, no, they're not. No one's saying that, and I'm not saying that. But like, it is something to account for. Is like, the more delays that happen, the less crunch is happening, technically. So like, that's why I don't really have as much of a problem with it.
I want to say though that what you're saying is not a guarantee. I want to hope that you're right, that if delays are happening, it is minimizing crunch. But I can't think of a game. I swear there was a game that delayed and it came out and they crunched anyway. Like,
because they should have delayed it like more. No, you're absolutely right. Like,
right. So we need to be careful that it's not like, oh, a delay. Thank goodness they don't have to crunch.
No, some of these crunch. It still happens for sure.
It still happens. It still happens. But I get what you're saying. You're saying that hopefully when they do this is a way to mitigate crunch, because even if you're not like ethically or morally opposed to it, because some people are like, well, I work 80 hours a week in the snow and uphill and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, get over it, you babies. Listen, from a purely pragmatic standpoint, crunch doesn't work. You get worse work. Like, they've done research into this. When you treat the employees that way, you actually don't get good work from them. So crunch is actually very ineffective. And I hope that the more and more that they come to find that from research and from studies, that, companies stop doing it for the employees, yes, but also because you hurt the employees needlessly. It's like they end up making a product that isn't even any good. So in my estimation, I always support delays because the alternative is typically worse. It either leads to crunch, or it leads to games coming to market that are not ready. And then the consumer and the devs lose in that situation. It's like the devs are forced to ship the game, it's not ready, and then they get criticized, and then the consumers are mad. So, I am always in support of delays, but the issue here is the pattern is not, there's some there's some studios in the industry kind of having a hard time. It's like, no, I think the pattern is Xbox speaks out of turn. Those emails we saw when Phil's like, this is a disaster scenario, go spend money, let's get some games for Game Pass, because they didn't have anything. It's like, it was a disaster scenario. You can sense that in that showcase when they're like, these are all the games coming out over the next 12 months. They were trying to sell a bill of goods because they didn't have anything, and they knew it. And that, to me, I feel like just has rippled and permeated throughout all their marketing approaches. Is they're not trying to give me hard dates. They're trying to keep me on Game Pass. Here's a trailer. I'm going to blow your mind. Their showcase was killer. Every headline says it was the best. And then, a bunch of, either vague dates or timelines, and then delays to follow. And my worry is that's not the only thing to follow. Delays are not the only thing. What also follows is games that aren't ready. So I hope you're right. I hope that these are to avoid crunch. Games come out at quality, and if there's ever been a company and a publisher that should be hitting a stride, it's Xbox. They own so much property. They own so many studios. At this point, there's just no excuse. Going forward, their game cadence and quality should be at the absolute top shelf. And I'm going to hold them to that, because I would hold anybody that owns this much property and has this much money, I'm going to hold them to a pretty high standard, because up to now it's like it's been questionable why that hasn't been happening. But going forward, I don't even know what excuse you would make going forward.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely need to stop setting expectations that they just can't deliver on, or they can't meet. That's totally viable criticism to say that, it's self-inflicted, that there's nothing necessitating that they say that, all the games you see today are going to come out in 12 months, and then they don't. I mean, it's the same thing we saw with Bungie recently, where they overpromised and underdelivered. Like, that's a self-inflicted wound, and it bleeds profusely when that happens. I don't know why chat is just engaging in just like the most rampant whataboutism about talking about, well, if they delay the game, then that just means that there's more crunch now, because the crunch is extended for 4 more months because the game got delayed, and now it's just crunch all the time. That's not how that works. If in the narrowest of exceptions, maybe, but most of the time, like if you're spreading out the amount of time that they have before they have to go gold, then they would be able to not take their time, so to speak. But the whole idea of crunch is it just constricts the amount of time that you have. Like, you have to get everything done in this very tight window. If that elongates, then you can work like normal hours to get up to that point that you need to be at. Now, sure, there's some instances where, like, I think we would both be concerned about the Stalker 2 delay, right? Because that wasn't a very long delay. Yeah. So that might be an example of when, like, maybe they're still going to be crunching because they didn't delay it out of the year. They only went from September to November. So it's like, we certainly hope not, because with what they've gone through over there in Ukraine, that would just be a travesty if they are going to have to break their backs to get this thing out by November, which is, again, why I'm in favor of delays. Like, even if that game got delayed again, I don't think it will, because it would be such a bad look for for Xbox to delay it twice in a short period. But even if it did, I would be like, fine, okay, that's fine. If it's mitigating crunch, if it's gonna make the game better, there's various reasons that these delays can be a good thing for the developers, for their staff, for the people who are eventually gonna play the games and buy the games. Like, are gonna spend their hard-earned money on the game, and then it's not optimized or it is optimized because they either took the time or they didn't. So like, those are reasons that I'm in favor of these types of things. Now, I do think that's like a large part of the perception about delays being so negative. It's not just necessarily because like gamers are spoiled or whatever, and they're like, I want it now. You know, like, I don't really think that that's necessarily what it is. I don't want to be patronizing by suggesting that. I think it's more about like the delays that stick in our head in the last couple of years. Like, they haven't been effective. Redfall got delayed several times, I think. What did that do for that project? We'll never know. We'll never know how bad it would have been if it had released on time. Halo Infinite, like, that game got delayed by a year. Still wasn't feature complete at launch. Still wasn't ready for prime time. Was, I'm sure, a lot better than it was if it had released a year earlier. And the campaign, I thought the experience was very good. But, like, it still wasn't ready to go on the multiplayer side. Suicide Squad got delayed by more than a year, I think. That game was a mess when it launched too. So like, I think there's kind of like a cynicism about delays in general, where people are like, I mean, you're not really doing anything for me anyway. This game's still going to be a broken mess, and it's going to be pile of steeping hot garbage when it comes out. So what do I care if you delay it? I think that's like people's perception. Whereas like, I can't even think of examples, but like, I'm sure if we looked back and like looked at all the games which were delayed in the last 3 years, we'd be able to point to some games where we're like, oh yeah, that was a good game. Like, and it came out and we don't remember the delay. Like, it doesn't stick in our mind because the game came out and it was good. Like, you know, like, it was a fully functional, competent game and we enjoyed it. And so it doesn't stick in our head that it was delayed. I think the ones that people remember are the flops. It's like, oh, they delayed, and then it comes out and it sucked.
Right.
Like, those are the ones that people remember. So I think there's like this cynicism around delays that like they don't actually help the project at all, and they don't make the game any better. And that's just like, I think those are outliers. I mean, sure, that could happen with any one of these 3 or 4 games that we've been talking about, but like, most of the time you give people more time to work on something, it's gonna be better in the long run, with some exceptions. So I think that is a bit of a misperception there, but like, I understand where it's being derived from. It's just because we've been sold a bill of goods before in that regard of like, oh, we're gonna delay it, like, make sure, like, you know, we're gonna take all the, you know, looter shooter bullcrap out of Suicide Squad and make it more like the Arkham Gallery, you know, whatever they said they were doing that delay for, and then it turned out just to be exactly what everybody thought it was gonna be, and it wasn't good. And we've had multiple instances of that, again, with Redfall and things of that like. So I don't blame people for being like, yeah, what good does the delay do me? Like, how are you helping me, the consumer? But like, I do think that that's kind of like a perversion of like, it's skewing things in one direction of like how delays have turned out. Whereas like, I think there's been plenty of games that have been delayed that it's been to the game and the players benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously very upset with Jedi Survivor, and I always bring it up. It's like, you guys should have delayed the game almost an entire year, and it's still in terrible shape on Steam. Seemingly has been abandoned, and I continue to call that what it is. I mean, that's just completely embarrassing to launch a title knowingly that isn't ready, and then just sort of abandon it and not to do right by your consumers. And so I think there's a general cynicism from games like that, because those are the lightning rods, right? I mean, that's a Star Wars game. I've got concern about Outlaws for similar reasons. It looks like it's continued to go through some degradation and some performance issues in the trailers and, you know, in the previews. So that would be another concern. And so I'm just going to continue to say, I really like the marketing strategy of say as little as possible. Don't give me a release date until you're within about 12 to 18 months of the game coming out, because those are the dates that tend to seem, they seem to move the least amount, right? And I think that strategy, I know it's frustrating. Everybody right now is like screaming at PlayStation that, you know, where was the showcase and where are the games? And it's like, PlayStation's strategy of not saying anything, it does frustrate YouTubers and people on Twitter, but it doesn't seem to have any effect on revenue and sales, and I don't think
nor does the average consumer care at all. Like,
right.
They're like, oh, they just look on the shelf and they're like, oh, look, it's a new Spider-Man game. Guess I'll buy that,
Yeah, like Astrobot and the Lego Horizon game.
They're so unaffected.
Right. With like Astrobot and the Lego Horizon game, it's like that was their big announcements for the summer, and those games look very promising. They look like they're going to be very commercially successful, and they're going to review very well. And then there is the anticipation, the prediction that they're going to do something pretty heavy in September for the PS5 Pro, and then we'll finally start hearing from maybe, like Broken Lobo mentioned, Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch has said nothing about Ghost of Tsushima 2, and I fully support that. I don't want to see the Ghost of Tsushima trailer until I know I'm within about a year of playing it. It doesn't do me any good. All it does is get me excited and then just lead to that feeling of, because when we're hearing that Phantom Blade Zero might not be out till 2026, that's really out of order for PlayStation to do that far in advance, to let them announce their game and to help them with production and marketing or whatever they're doing. It's like, why would you announce that game if it's that far away?
The thing is like they could be having all the same issues as Xbox, but they just know how to keep that under wraps and just restrict their messaging to what it needs to be. Like we've talked about this earlier in the year. Like Xbox just continues to step on landmines that they put there. Like, it's like nobody's telling you to come out and say these things. Nobody's telling you to come out and say that games will ship in the next 12 months, but they've got to do it because I think you've talked about them being like Mr. Nice Guy, or I'm not really sure like what your terminology is there, but like they've got to be like friendly, like with all the podcasters and like the Xbox faithful or whatever. So like they've got to constantly be communicating and they're consumer friendly and whatever. And then like 70% of the time it just blows up in their face. Whereas like, I could be right. And maybe there isn't a systemic issue with development at Xbox game studios. And it's just a problem industry wide right now. And all developers are encountering difficulties with the current tech and the current gen and the current engines now. But like, it's happening at PlayStation, and mum's the word. Like, nobody needs to know about it, because why would they need to know about it? Like they're not saying that these games are coming out, so then they're not saying that they have to get delayed. Like, it could just all be happening behind closed doors, as it probably should. So if that's the case, then it's just like Xbox just needs to get out of their own way in that regard and stop all this messaging that like that it ends up hurting more than helping. It's like they want to be present and they want to be communicative, but like there is such a thing as being over communicative. And there's like a reason that companies like Nintendo have had so much success by just saying what they want to say when they have something to say. And then we go away for a long time. You don't hear from us. And then all of a sudden, boom, now we got a new Zelda game, or now we got a new Mario game. Nobody knew what the hell we were doing for the last 8 months. And then boom, here we are. Here we are again with that thing that we're going to provide at some point. Here's Metroid Prime 4. Like, that's how they operate, and it works. It's effective. And like Xbox in attempting to be like the, buddy, oh yeah, like the consumer, oh we're here for the gamers, and we're all about giving you stuff on Game Pass. And it's like, hey guys, we gotta delay all that stuff that we said was gonna come to Game Pass. Like it doesn't work. Like it's not effective for them.
Well, and I think everybody jokes about the Game Pass effect, but I have to say that's the Game Pass effect. You have to continue to have this show of force to get people to sign up or stay on to Game Pass, which I feel there's going to be a growing tension within the company of, okay, Game Pass is great, but we're talking about games that are going to be landing on PlayStation. We're talking about games that are going to be landing on all the platforms, and you can't do that. You can't walk out, promise a bunch of games, promise a bunch of dates, and then shuffle them all down the calendar because, hey, that doesn't really hurt us. We're keeping people on Game Pass. Well, if you're trying to operate in the buy-to-play market and you got shareholders that are impressed with your content sales, all that's going up for them because of ABK, well, they're going to want to see more of that. And you're going to put that into jeopardy if you enter the buy-to-play market and you shake everybody's confidence in you hitting these dates because you're operating under this old playbook of, announce a lot and announce early. And if we have to move dates, so be it. It doesn't hurt our aims to keep people on Game Pass, right? So I don't know. I feel like there's going to be a growing tension with their marketing strategy. And I wonder if we see a shift in the coming years where no, we can't do that with a game like Blade. You can't do that with a game like, Doom. These games are going to be multi-plat and landing on other platforms, and you can't do this nonsense of like, oh yeah, it's coming. No, it's not. Oh, it's coming. No, it's not. We got to delay it. Oh, now that it's out, it's not feature complete. It's not ready. That's going to be destructive to consumer confidence in the buy-to-play market. And then your shareholders are going to want to know what's going on. Why are you making less money? Why are content sales down? Why is all this happening? Well, because you're shipping stuff before it's ready. And I think that shift away from the Game Pass being the focal point, and even some of the things we said this morning about hardware, I can't even make a prediction about like what their showcases and what their strategy is going to look like in the future. Because I think that when people are wanting to buy games, they're less receptive to this. They're not going to put up with it. I think when you're on Game Pass, it's like, oh, well, no big deal. I'm getting games every month. So, oh, it got delayed. Oh, that's fine. I'll play something else on Game Pass. I'll play Indiana Jones. I'll play Stalker 2. I'll play whatever. And
Call of Duty.
The rest of the market doesn't have that attitude, and it will not be as well received or as tolerated as the Xbox loyal seem to put up with it more, or the we're going to be eating good on Game Pass. We're going to be eating good on Game Pass, and it's like, yeah, I guess. I mean, if that's all that matters to you is eating good on Game Pass and not getting games when they're promised, or not getting games that are feature complete, then sure, I guess you're eating good on Game Pass.
Well, isn't that kind of the crux of the whole thing? Is like, I mean, their hardware sales are so down, so like they have the base that they have, and it's not growing at any significant rate. It's not growing really at all, honestly. And so I think that's why I was able to get this right and call this, as the title and thumbnail say, is like, I am the audience that they're speaking to at the moment, where they are saying like, hey, you probably got some other games that you want to play. There's no reason for us to bombard you with games when we could just, spread these out, make sure our devs have the time that they need, so we avoid crunch, so that the game is more ready to go and optimized at the time it comes out. Like, various reasons that this just makes sense. Like, so our calendar just kind of is more things are spread out, and it's a fuller, there's a fullness to it. There's a fuller showing across like this 6-month period or what have you. I'm the audience that's like on board for that, and I think like when you're talking about, well, the other part of the market isn't going to go for that. Like, I think that the hardware sales like resoundingly showcase that, and I think they're like aware of that. Like, they're not winning over new people. So I think it's like more about retention at this point. Like, there's people that are subscribed to Game Pass. That's who they need to retain, who they need to be in good graces with. So like, if you're saying, well, our commitment is to like make sure that you have something new to play pretty much over a wide, period at different intervals, that's what people are on Game Pass for. Like, that's what the dad that has Game Pass, so that his 3 kids, one's older, one's young, one's much younger, one's almost about to finish high school, whatever. There's varying age gaps, varying interests. They've got Game Pass, so across the board, all those interests can be met. There's a wide variety of games that can be played. The dad's playing them too. Like, that's what Game Pass is effective at, is like catering to a specific audience. Their moves that they're making right now, they're maneuvering, their practices, they coincide with that. They are tailoring to that type of audience that they have right now. They're not garnering another audience. Like, they're not attracting other people like that. We've seen that. Like, that's in the data. They are not attractive to other people. So like, that's why I was able to call this, is like, my mentality is somebody that's like in that audience that understands what their value is, what the hard limitations of that are, which we continue to be ever cognizant of, unfortunately for them. And I think they're cognizant of it too. They might have been in denial for a little while, but it may be, like you keep referring to Satya coming in and Big Daddy Microsoft coming in. I think they're the reality check. And so like, I think their practices and their maneuvering as of the last half a year, if not full year, have been, okay, let's set things up so that we're catering to the audience that we have, so we continue to instill in them belief that there is value here. I think the people that are complaining, honestly, like, don't really like Xbox that much to begin with. They aren't subscribed to Game Pass, or they don't love their Game Pass subscription, and they don't think that it's very useful. And those are all generalizations. But what I'm trying to say is, like, there are people that are on Game Pass that are happy with it for what it provides them, and these moves are catering to those people specifically and nobody else. And so, like, yeah, they're going to draw a lot of ire and criticism from the majority of people because the majority of people aren't gaming on Xbox. Like, it's in the data. The majority of people are not gaming on Xbox because there are other more desirable platforms to be on that are having more success right now. So their main focus needs to be retention and appeasing the audience that they have. And I think the moves that they're making are seemingly effectively doing that. That will, we can look back retrospectively in a year or 2 years from now to see if they were able to accomplish that. But like, they are strategizing in such a way that it is trying to appeal to that audience. And I think the fact that I was able to call what they were going to do before they did it means that the perspective of somebody that is in that audience, that's being catered to in a semi-effective manner. So like, I don't think that they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're just not like we see them as like this like come from behind racehorse that like has somehow this potential to like get back up and be in the front runner. Like, they're just not. Like, they're kind of done with that. They're not going to compete with the other two main players in the console space. They're just going to run the race that they're going to run at this point. And so, like, if we keep looking at them from the perspective of, like, comparing them to the alternatives, they're going to keep coming up short. And so it's like we have to look at Xbox, like, I think at this point, like, in a vacuum. And that's, like, that's not to, like, defend them or anything. Like, that's bad. Like, that's bad that they're at that point now to where it's like they're in their own lane and they're a tier down. Like, they're, AAA baseball. They're minor league. They're not in the big leagues anymore. But it's like that also in accepting that and realizing that they like that can give them the ability to maneuver and navigate in a way that allows them to thrive in that particular space. And I don't think that they're doing anything right now that particularly like ruins that for themselves. And I think that the people that are being critical are expecting them to be more than that. And maybe rightly so, because they should have been, but they're in a bad place now.
I mean, I would say they are in the big leagues. They're in the big leagues with respect to publishing. Like, they're now one of the biggest video game publishers in the world. They're just not in the big leagues with respect to hardware, which is why I really, really wonder. That's what I was telling to Jez earlier. I was like, what are they going to do with all these people if Satya is like, look, hardware's waste. It's a waste right now. It's not where the money is. You can't keep going to the shareholders and saying hardware's dropping, MAU is soaring, software sales are soaring. Your shareholders are going to be like, well, then that's where you put the money. That's where you put the investment. That's where you put the future of the platform and the future of the profit. So, I do think they're in the big leagues. I think they stepped into the big leagues of publishing games, and that's why I do wonder when that tension point's going to be, because if you want to sell games on PC and PlayStation and maybe even Nintendo, you got to hit your dates. The quality's got to be there. You're not trying to keep people on Game Pass anymore. You're trying to sell games. So, and we gave Kirk his flowers. He said, Avowed's going to get delayed. I've continued to be worried about Indiana Jones, and if I'm wrong about that one, well, I tell you what, I hope it's one of the good ones. I hope it doesn't land the way that Redfall and Forza Motorsport did. I hope it's a feature-complete, polished game, because it's a big piece of property. It's a big win for them to land a recognizable IP game, at the end of this year. So, guys, I am going to have to call it there, because I'm going to have to be a little bit more rigid with the schedules on Mondays and Tuesdays coming up, because kiddos are going to start having soccer practice, so I got to be better about that. So I'll tell you what I need you to do. Take a quick second if you've enjoyed this talk show. There's over 400 of you here. Smash that like button. Get us to 200 likes. You guys are really close to the goal. 9 more members, and I owe you a 5 spot. And take a quick second and make sure and check out Kirk's channel, What's New Video Games. He's clickable in the description. Throw him a sub. Throw him a like. Watch some of his videos. We're going to transition into the Writer's Room, a segment for the members. You get to end your day with me. Kirk, what are you planning on doing? Are you going to do anything with Marvel Rivals if they're going to head over to your channel? What can they look forward to?
I'm trying to decide if I'm doing a Concord review. I don't know if anybody cares. Like, I don't know if it's worth doing it. I got a lot of footage, and I've got thoughts. Like, I spent enough time with it. I I think the plan right now is still to do a review, but I'm a little bit hesitant on it of like, does anybody really, I mean, even care at this point? Is anybody like on the fence? Like they're like, I don't know about Concord. Like I really want to buy it, but like I got to go watch Kirk's review. Like I feel like people have kind of already decided that this game is going to come and go and with very little fanfare. So I'm not sure about that one. I may also do a Madden review. I've been spending a lot of time with college football, so it'd be interesting to kind of compare and contrast. I did a Madden review last year. If you want to go check that out on my channel. Smooth Jazz looks like 8-8 says he has a gold badge. Well, you must have been on hiatus for a little while. He says Kirk needs to learn to be a little more concise. LOL. Welcome back. Glad you must have had a long break, but we're happy to have you here now.
Lancelot did give you some credit. He said $5 super chat. He said, really respect you guys for seeing this coming. Don't get the credit you deserve. Saw your prediction a while ago. I'll take some blame there on Kirk's little, I think that was a long section of just Kirk. I zoned out a teeny bit. I was reading chat and just like, I was totally letting you guys just interact with him. And I was 100% just sort of like enjoying not having to talk. I was like, I'm just gonna, and then I realized I was like, oh wait.
That's the only reason he has me back, guys, is like he's like creature's not breathing down his throat and he doesn't have to constantly talk. Like it's just like, and I'm just like, and that's another thing. It's like when we see things like this and he's like, blah blah blah, proper noun, place name, just zone it out, bro. It's fine. He's like,
dude, I totally did. I just zoned out. Well, and I was also, you guys might have seen me, I kept muting. I was having a hard time interjecting because I'm on the tail end of just horrible allergies and constantly coughing. And I kept wanting to like interject, and I was like, oh, I got a tickle. Hang on, I got a cough. So I was like, I'm just going to let him go. I'm just going to rest my voice. So, guys, you can hang with us. We're going to head to the writer's room. Thanks so much for a strong start to Monday. You can loop back and watch the previous streams and the uploads. If you're not a member, you can't come with us, but there's still content you might have missed. Go watch that upload where I argue Xbox should drop hardware. Leave a comment, leave a like. That video had a nice strong start, and you can help it out and continue to do that. I'm going to hit live on the writer's room. Hey, thanks so much for being a member, and you may have gotten a gifted member today. 91 members plus all the ones that I gifted as well, and a strong week last week. You guys are close to the average you need every day to hit the goal. We'll do a big Jackbox community game night this Friday night. We'll do an unfiltered one where we'll turn off all the family-friendly settings, and we'll have a good time with you guys. I'm going to end the previous stream. Kirk and I were talking about the Avowed delayed. I had to give him his flowers. He called it, and it got delayed literally the week he said it would be the one to get it, and he nailed it. So we talked about the effect of Game Pass and other aspects of the Microsoft and Xbox strategy and why that could lead to maybe more delays in the future as well. So I thought that was good.